Welcome to the Autism Blueprint Podcast. I'm your host, Janine Hershkovitz, and it's my goal to help you create a more peaceful home while living with autistic and neurodivergent loved ones. Each episode, we focus on a different room in the house and help you create a peace plan for your home. So let's get started. Hey friends, welcome back to the Autism Blueprint Podcast. I'm your host, Janine Hershkovitz, and I'm thrilled to have you join us for this enlightening episode. If you haven't checked it out yet, Autism Blueprint is now in video format on YouTube. So that will be a link in the show notes. If you haven't checked it out yet, please hit the subscribe button when you get there so that you can be kept up to date on all the most recent episodes. And of course, if you're listening on Spotify, Apple, Pandora, or any of the major podcast platforms, please consider leaving us a review to help us get the word out about our amazing guests. And speaking of amazing guests, today we are diving deep into the complex worlds of trauma, high conflict relationships, and the unique challenges faced by special needs parents in those situations. I'm excited to introduce our guest, Rachel Dunkle, a licensed clinical professional counselor and certified high conflict divorce coach. Rachel brings a wealth of knowledge and personal experience to the table, having navigated her own high conflict divorce while raising a special needs daughter. Together, we'll explore the nuances of trauma, the impact of narcissism, and coercive control in relationships. And as we discuss these important topics, Rachel shares invaluable insights, practical strategies, and personal experiences to help those that are feeling overwhelmed or isolated in their journeys. So whether you're a special needs parent, a therapist, or someone simply looking to understand these dynamics better, there's something here for everyone. So make sure to stick around until the end because you won't want to miss Rachel's powerful message about the importance of community, self-compassion, and finding your voice amid the chaos. Let's get started. Well, Rachel Dunkle, it is a pleasure to have you on the Autism Blueprint podcast today. How are you doing?
I am doing really well. Thanks for having me, Janine. I appreciate you welcoming me into this space to get to chat and get to know a little bit more about each other and talk about our work together. I'm putting my hands up. Let's try that again.
You want to try it again?
Okay. Yeah, let's do that again and then we'll begin.
That's okay. We'll take it.
I gotta get it done.
Okay.
I won't do it again, Rob. I promise.
All right, here we go. Well, Rachel Dunkle, welcome to the Autism Blueprint podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Janine.
It's my pleasure. So, Rachel, I want you to start out by telling me how you became what you are today, what you do today as a therapist.
Yeah. So I actually work in two different specializations, one as a licensed clinical professional counselor, addictions counselor, and I'm also certified as a high conflict divorce coach. So I have these two different bubbles or specializations that I work with that actually have some overlap. But I started as a therapist, a trauma therapist, about 15 years ago. I started doing that work from my own experience with a partner who struggled with addiction and felt called to do that work and help people who were navigating some unique challenges around alcohol and other substance abuse issues. And of course, my own experience goes back even farther to early life, family of origin dynamics. I had a brother who struggled severely with mental illness. And so these two things sort of came together and inspired me to get into the field of mental health, trauma work, addiction work. And then later on, actually only within the last 5 years, have I gotten into working in the high conflict divorce realm. And I did that specifically from navigating my own high conflict divorce. And this intersects from a place of my work as a therapist and moving into now this divorce realm of coaching, because I learned after navigating a really tumultuous, high conflict, painful experience through divorce with someone who has narcissistic traits, that there was a missing piece to helping individuals that are going through these experiences. And so I later went on, after I became a certified high conflict divorce coach, I actually integrated a certification as a narcissistic abuse treatment specialist. So that is the newest thing that I've added to my profile, my portfolio, we would say.
Nice, nice. Well, so we've thrown around a couple of terms that we hear a lot, but I want to clarify what it means when you and I use the words trauma
Yeah.
and narcissism. Yeah,
Yeah.
because we see it a lot on social media, and sometimes it's accurate and sometimes it's way off.
100%. I am with you.
Yeah. So, start first by telling me what your definition of trauma would be.
So when I am talking about being a trauma therapist, I think there's a spectrum like we see all over these days. And actually we're moving more into this spectrum when we're talking about personality disorders as well. But trauma can be a spectrum of experiences that, and I'm an EMDR therapist as well, so that sort of stay in our body and our nervous system, create a sense of threat, moving us out of our window of tolerance, and move our bodies and our nervous system to a state of fear, and potentially having some pretty dramatic consequences or symptomology that is associated with those experiences. So it could be what we call a small T trauma, or versus a big T trauma. But I have worked most of my career with individuals who have had some pretty significant experiences around family of origin, developmental trauma, meaning that there was early life experiences that really impacted an individual's ability to feel safe in their body, to feel safe in the world. This can be physical abuse, sexual abuse, psychological abuse. There's a range when I talk about trauma, and I don't want to minimize it. But trauma can also be, and I've worked in this realm with individuals who, specifically around EMDR, who've been in car accidents, which allowed their body to be in this place where they were fearful for their life and couldn't regulate their nervous system after the experience. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about trauma, really life-altering events.
Yes, yes. I that kind of stays with you,
Yeah.
right? And is still affecting you to this day. Yeah, I love that. That's a great definition. Um, let's kind of go. You mentioned narcissism.
Yep. So
What is narcissism?
yeah, I didn't mean to jump in there yet. Maybe I got a little
You're
excited.
good.
Um,
Yeah.
so when I talk about narcissism, again, it's on the spectrum. Now, narcissism, when clinically we talk about narcissistic personality disorder, it is a range of symptoms that we see in individuals that really limit their capacity to be able to function healthfully in the world, specifically in relationships. So we see individuals who meet criteria for narcissistic personality disorder as having a lack of empathy, grandiosity. And I'm going to be clear, there are even different dynamics with narcissism, that it doesn't look like the classic highly charismatic, highly manipulative, gaslighting pattern of narcissism. We see more covert, where it looks a little bit more of the victimization, the experience of feeling like the world's against them, which is also can be true, and the typical grandiosity of narcissism that we talk about often culturally.
Mhm.
But there is a spectrum of narcissistic traits. So when I talk about narcissism, I'm not specifically just talking about narcissistic personality disorder, because narcissism and narcissistic traits can be present without a narcissistic personality disorder diagnosis. Now,
Yeah.
this
I'm
gets
glad
messy.
you said
Yeah. It gets messy, and it gets a little even talking about it as a therapist is actually sort of risky at times, because we don't want to create a misunderstanding of what narcissism is. If somebody's on their phone and taking pictures or selfies of themselves, or scrolling social media and comparing themselves, that does not mean they're narcissistic. it may be a flavor that is very different, that our society has now created into this understanding of what narcissism is, which is not an accurate display of what narcissism is. I think people have said this, that, just because somebody's acting like a jerk doesn't make them a narcissist. So
Yes, yes. I'm glad you said that, because I was going to say, the people that, dislike your posts or say something rude, you can't just call them a narcissist and it fits. I know in my office a lot we talk about coercive control
yeah.
sometimes, rather than narcissistic control, because then it's less pathologizing. But if you're being coercively controlled, sometimes you don't even know it. So I mean, speak a little bit to the women that are basically in relationships that they either don't leave, can't leave. The biggest question, and I know I'm kind of jumping around, but this just came to mind. The biggest question that I always get from people is, gosh, why didn't she just leave?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that question, it can actually be really harmful, because it sort of shames or creates saying that the victim is actually a um, a participant in this abusive process. And we want to move away from that. There are dynamics that play out with individuals who have coercive patterns of control or antagonistic, high conflict personalities that make it really challenging to leave relationships. Now, one of the things I talk a lot about with women is the impact of this manipulation, devaluation, and gaslighting on our sense of self, right? So when we are in relationships with somebody who is in this manipulative pattern of making us question our own sense of sanity, then we start to distrust the world. So, I mean, there are very big ways in which it can be harmful to leave: physical abuse, potentially financial abuse. Those are sort of the bigger ways in which we see women being unable, or individuals, I'm not even going to say women, individuals being unable to leave a relationship. But if we drill this down and we see the impact of psychological abuse, specifically like gaslighting and devaluation, then we start to see how individuals start to lose their sense of self. And that is the intent behind that type of abuse. It is to take away their sense of self and make them distrust their own internal voice. So when the idea of leaving comes up, like, oh, I think I should leave, this really feels unhealthy, and their partner says, what are you talking about? You're crazy. And it doesn't, you're crazy. You're making this up. This is all in your head. We start to question, like, oh, is it? Is this all in my head? And if it is, then why isn't this all good enough? There's a quote by Glennon Doyle. She specifically, in her book Untamed, talks about this imagery of the cheetah and wanting something more, and then asking herself, shouldn't this be good enough? And I think that happens a lot in these high conflict dynamics of when you are with a person who presents in a certain way, very charismatic, everyone loves them. They, on the outside of the world, have made everything look really pretty. And we're being gaslit to believe like this is a good life, both internally and externally, often from family members. Then it's hard to break out of that cage and start to step into believing like, oh no, this isn't actually good enough. I deserve to have something more. I deserve to feel safe in my body. So those are some of the coercive control tactics that I see and work with most often with women. What do you tend to see?
Yeah, yeah.
You mentioned that you hear this a lot, or you're talking about this a lot in your practice. How does this come up for you?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Well, it's been one of my budding specialty areas as well, and it kind of found me. I just had, and it doesn't have to be women, but in particular in my practice, it was women that were coming in, special needs moms in particular, that
Mhm.
were confused about what they were doing wrong, right? In air quotes. I've had women come in and say, my husband and I can't seem to get along. We can't seem to agree about, what to do with my child. And then sometimes I'll bring the other partner in and realize, oh, they have some very unhealthy patterns. And so that's kind of how I got into the field. Speak a little bit to that special needs mom piece, because something that I don't know if I've mentioned yet is that you have a special needs daughter.
I do. And I will say that I think it always creates a unique dynamic within the family system, but adds an even more challenging dynamic in a antagonistic relationship, or a relationship characterized with coercive control. Now, I mean, you asked the question about leaving. Why didn't you leave? When we have special needs children, that creates a whole new storyline, right? There's a new narrative of, why should I leave, or can I leave? Can I physically be able to take care of a child on my own if I do separate even 50% of the time? Will I be able to financially support myself? There's some major questions there that aren't even about, well, why did you stay, right? Like, it's not an easy decision to be able to say stay or go. But some of the pieces with special needs parents and this dynamic that plays out with antagonistic partners is, you've seen this, where our children often, whether they have special needs or not, take our attention, right? And for somebody who has more high conflict dynamics, whether you want to call it narcissistic traits or not, they're not used to not being the center of attention. And a special needs child is going to take more of our attention by just necessity. The thing about narcissism that I really come from a place of wholeheartedness around is individuals who have, whether it's narcissistic traits, which I think we all do in some ways, right? Like, this is part of the developmental process. But individuals who have more narcissistic traits or narcissistic personality disorder, the way I understand that is trauma. It's another form of trauma that is presented in these defense mechanisms, which can be really harmful.
Yes.
But from my perspective, it doesn't make the person bad. It makes the behaviors harmful, right? Like, I really like speaking to that because, and I would say this is true about my ex too. I don't think he's innately a bad person, but the behaviors were harmful. And I hope that there's healing. And I think that's the thing about narcissistic personality disorder, or narcissism in general, is that healing is so challenging. The defenses are so strong that it's hard to heal that. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. Thank you for sharing your own experience with that, because I know that for a lot of the moms that I see, particularly in special needs families, they'll say, there must be more that I can do, and then when they learn that maybe it's because their partner has a trauma history that they're acting out, in this way, if that's the reason, then the spouse tends to be like, oh, well, maybe there are more things I can do to help him heal, or maybe I can bring him into therapy, and I usually do encourage, the person to come into therapy, but it's really impossible to do couples counseling when someone is either actively mistreating the other person or actively using substances to cope. Do you find that too?
Absolutely. And actually, it's been determined that couples counseling can be counterintuitive in these relationships. Like, active couples counseling week after week, because it's this environment in which it's supposed to be safe, where an individual can share their deepest experiences and be the most vulnerable. And in a setting where an individual is taking that information and using it against someone, using it against their partner, that could be really risky, depending on how significant the other person's experience of narcissism is, it can start to get into risky, like physical risk, where somebody might be potentially at risk of physical abuse or physical harm with the information that's presented in the therapy room. So yes, and it's interesting you mentioned addiction, because addiction often looks very similar. It looks similar in how the behaviors are played out by an individual who's actively using. It's going to look at times, very self-centered, very self-focused, and unable to meet another person or empathize with their partner. So I'm not against bringing them in the room to be able to see like what the dynamic is and actually help my clients heal and have a greater understanding from a place of radical acceptance. But actually doing real couples therapy is likely going to end up in a place that is not helpful, that is potentially harmful.
Yes. Oh, that's so well said, Rachel. And I feel like so many therapists are not well trained in both trauma and in those kind of high conflict relationships. Um, Tell me a little bit about what is a high conflict divorce, because I know that's your specialty area, and
Yeah.
how do you help people with it?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for asking that. So, having gone through a high conflict divorce, some of the dynamics that played out in the relationship continued to play out in the divorce. Manipulation, coercive control, financial control, actually continues in some ways to play out. And so we see a lot of the behaviors that happened in the relationship on high in these high conflict dynamic divorces. So use of the system, use of family court system to abuse the partner. We see
Mm.
this with like the idea of parental alienation claims and saying that the child is being alienated from the unhealthy parent. So instead of the child having a natural pull from the abusive parent will say, "Oh no, they're actually being alienated against me." And so there's actually an industry around parental alienation claims and reunification therapy, which has been proven to be ineffective and actually potentially harmful. So we often see the children are
Yes.
weaponized. Attorneys are weaponized against the partners. Family court system is challenged at best at being able to understand psychological abuse. And often all three of these things become a recipe for control, abuse, and harm of often the healthy partner.
Yes, 100%. And I kind of want to repeat something that you said there, which was really important about parental alienation, right? Because I hear that a lot in my office as well. And it is often used in family court to benefit the abusive partner, where
Yes.
they cry, oh, they're being alienated. And the family court sometimes is complicit in that abuse. Have you discovered that as well, that they just don't have their stuff together?
They are, and in many places, there's been research done around how the family court system is actually, oh, putting myself out here, at times in bed with the parental alienation industry, right? Um,
Yes.
it is an industry that is not supported by insurance based coverage. So there's a lot of money in these industries, and I don't think it's specifically coming from a place of I want to believe that people aren't just complicit from a place of knowing. I want to believe this is from naivete, but um, there's
Yeah.
there is a dilemma here around the family court system and parental alienation claims, and it does end up creating more harm and increased attorney fees. If to be
Yeah.
honest, there's a piece of that here. So it's a challenging dynamic. Some people are really trying to navigate this and do it well. to be able to take care of kids. And there's a lot of kids that are caught in the gaps. So I want to circle back real quick. So how do I do this work? Why do I do this work? How do I help women in particular? So having gone through my own experience of this, where my children were weaponized against me, what I found was that my nervous system was incredibly dysregulated. Everything in my life, because divorce in general, then you add in special needs parenting, and a high conflict dynamic, and it puts our whole body in a state of threat, right? Like I'm potentially losing my children, potentially losing my financial security. I'm losing my attachment, whether they are healthy or not, there's still an attachment loss from my partner.
Yes.
This is a recipe for our nervous system to be completely out of control, right? Like I was seeking for myself, trying to find places of footing and control in almost the worst ways. And to the point where I was finding myself going to these deep places of questioning around, like, should I even be here? And I don't think this is an uncommon thought for individuals who are in these high conflict dynamics. Is it
You're right.
going through this battle or checking out? And I didn't want any, and I had a great attorney, I had an incredible therapist, but I saw them maybe 3 hours a week, right? So if I saw my therapist twice a week and maybe my attorney, and my attorney's not there to regulate my nervous system, I had no one else.
Yeah.
No one else. So I was like, when I finally got through it and was able to survive it, survive the divorce, get my children full time, which was the long game, by the way.
Okay.
I got to a point of saying, like, individuals should not have to go through this alone. They should not have to go 3 hours a week and imagine that they can parent, not feel like they're going to lose their life, their sanity. I mean, all of these things were really very real for me. And I think they're very real for individuals going through these high conflict dynamics. And then you try and parent a special needs child on top of it, which is dysregulating at best at times.
Yes. Yes, 100%.
So that's how I got into this field. I was like, I don't want other people to have to do this alone. And I made a program that was going to be able to support women wraparound services, wraparound care, that they always had a place to scream to if they needed to.
Oh, tell me about your program.
Yeah. So Resilience to Rise is the name of my coaching program. And there's an integration. So I'm trained in Brene Brown's work. So there's an integration of understanding shame and vulnerability and nervous system regulation that we do in exercises on a weekly basis. I meet with women every other week to really dive into the strategic dynamics of divorce. So working with attorneys, working with parenting coordinators to be able to help them understand what are the unique dynamics of either parallel parenting or communicating with a high conflict partner. And then in addition to that, they have access to me from Monday through Friday, 9 to 6 p.m., where they can just Voxer me at any time to ask any questions they might have or scream. And in all honesty, people they can do that over the weekend too. I might not be as quick to respond. But to be able to have someone that's constantly hearing you, right? To have a space to be able to feel seen and heard, that's not just on this 1 or 2 or 3 hours a week, but that you always have an ally to be like, if nothing else, someone is hearing this pain that I'm experiencing right now. And divorce is a very lonely process if we don't have it especially in high conflict dynamics where our partners have made our world small to begin with. And then you add in the flavor of special parenting, and that's isolating too. So.
Wow. And I just thank you for sharing some of your personal struggles as well, because I think it's so important for us as therapists. I mean, I built my whole practice on my own personal experience plus training, right? We go get the training, but it's going to be so, I just know there are listeners out there that are going, oh my gosh, she gets me. She gets me. And so, all of your contact information, everything will be in the show notes, for sure, because I love that idea of that they can reach out to you when they need to. I can't tell you how many 3 o'clock in the morning emails I get from the women that I'm trying to help through these things. And it feels like sometimes as a therapist that you just get bombarded with all of the things that are on their mind, which, that needs to happen too.
Yeah.
So as a therapist, it's been tricky for me to say, okay, put all your thoughts in an email or write them all in a journal, and then let's talk about it next week at your session. They need help that moment, like that moment that their body is dysregulated.
Yep.
And I'm
Yeah.
sure you can probably relate to that.
Absolutely. And I think that was one of the decisions between moving out of a specific role as a therapist, because as a therapist there's boundaries around our work and it's intentional and necessary, right? And as a coach there's still boundaries around our work, but there's a difference about how I'm with clients because we're not working on the trauma. When I'm coaching, I'm not working on the past experience of navigating the trauma. I leave that to the therapist. And I don't do both, right? When I'm working with a client as a divorce coach, I'm their coach. If I was working with a client as a therapist, I'm their therapist. So there's a separation there. And I get to be more direct and helpful as a coach in certain ways that I wouldn't do as a therapist. I'm there to hold space and create an opportunity for healing and trusting their process. As a divorce coach, we're looking at the future and trying to strategically plan on how to get them to their next steps. And ideally, they're working with a therapist while we do our work.
Right.
So it actually, in a lot of ways, helps the therapist to be able to take some of that off and say, I'm going to see this person. I know that they're going to have support, and I don't have to be their only support through this process.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. So for the therapists out there listening that need a little bit of extra help, and I know I'm going to be using you in this way for sure, Rachel, because the legal stuff is the part that I feel like sometimes they need the most help with, and I don't have that experience. So finding other coaches or therapists that can help, I really do feel like, it's similar to becoming a special needs mom, where you have to build this village around yourself, this community of helpers. And then you're dealing with this high conflict divorce. So your community it's got to be bigger, right?
Yep. Yeah. And often, as I'm sure it, it needs to be bigger, and it's usually the time it gets smaller and smaller. So strategically, we actually have to, and that's where other members like myself or a therapist can be supportive, because it gets smaller in ways around relationships. Like there's a lot of shame that goes into often in any divorce. But then you add in the high conflict divorce dynamics, and just that question you said, well, why didn't I leave sooner? If I could have protected my kids better, if I would have gotten out. How did I not prepare myself for the future financially to be able to leave the relationship sooner? All of the questions and rumination that comes with this type of relational stress.
Mhm.
So having allies to be able to say, okay, let me give you another support system. Let me add on, because family may not always be the most supportive, although I think reach out to whoever you can grasp onto, whoever's a safe place. And then community outlets, groups, even if it is a special needs, like a special needs support group, it may not be specifically for divorce, but it's a community. And that's what we need going through this.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, 100%. I've been running groups for moms for over a decade, and every time we almost talk about other life things more so than our kids, because there are other things that happen. There's other problems that happen. But having a special needs child and a special needs life, it's a culture unto itself. So knowing that you're in a room of safe people that understand you and get you, is huge. That being said, as a family member, as an ally of someone, like say I have a friend or a family member that's going through what you went through, how can I be a safe person for them?
Mm-hmm. I would say the answer is very similar to being in relationship with anyone, right? Like we show up, we hear, we listen, with openness and empathy, and
Mhm.
withhold advice. Leave that for the experts.
Yes.
Withhold
Yes.
advice because we don't have the answers. And really, that's not what we need from our people, our loved ones. We need someone to hold space for us and hold boundaries. Uh,
Hmm.
because honestly, it can be so dysregulating and chaotic. Having someone actually hold boundaries with us keeps us safer
Hmm.
too, right? Just like kids. And just be able to
What do
be,
you think that, not to interrupt you, but what would that look like, do you think,
yeah.
holding a boundary for someone?
Um, Actually not being available 24/7, being able to not enter in the chaos with. So during my divorce process, and I have all therapist friends. God love them. I am so grateful I had them through the divorce.
They're
But
the only friends to have. I do too.
they're the best friends to have. Um,
Yep.
but I could feel their boundaries too, right? So they weren't going to enter in the chaos with me. And that's what I'm talking about from
Mhm.
a boundary perspective.
Mhm.
If somebody who's going to walk in and be like, yes, they're terrible. We need to go and fight them or call them or text them. Text your ex, that's never the right answer. It's never the right
Right.
answer.
Right.
Walk away, step away. So somebody that like the friends that I had during this process could show up in the healthy way when I needed them, but didn't have to jump in the fire with me and burn
Yeah.
up with me, right? They could say, I'm
Mhm.
going to stand on the sidelines. I'm going to hold my hands right here. When you need me, I'm here. And I think coaches are the same way. I'm not going to jump in the fire with you because that's not
Yeah.
helpful, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah. It's kind of like if someone's drowning, it's if you don't know how to save them, you could drown too.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
So having that boundary and also just continuing to show up. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that. Anything else that we didn't cover today that you want parents to know?
In these times, it's really easy to isolate. It's really easy to step back, and this goes along with what we were just talking about. It's really easy to find ourselves in a state of freeze and laying in bed and not getting out, especially if we don't happen to have the children at the time. Um, some of that is purposeful. In some ways, I want to honor
Mhm.
that and say, there are times where our nervous system really just needs to rest, and that's okay. And coming from a place of self-compassion and non-judgment is crucial.
Mm.
And we can't do this alone. In every way, we are attachment oriented individuals. We're a species, and we need people, and healing is going to happen in connection with others, even when it doesn't feel safe. If we can stretch ourselves to find environments that can feel momentarily safe, whether that's with a friend or a family member or with a therapist or with a coach or with a community, finding those places to have connection, I think, is crucial in this process. I don't think we can heal alone
Yeah.
through this type of experience. So I really want to, and I think that's true as special needs parents. I think we need other people too because it can feel so isolating and alone. And it's
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
easy to go through life. I don't know. Has that been your experience, Janine, or with the people that you've worked with?
It's 100%. In fact, I was just going to say that it sounds a lot like the special needs community. It's very easy to isolate when you have a child that's either difficult to take out in public or requires, an entire entourage and supplies and everything else in order to get your child with special needs out of the house, it's exhausting. And it's so much easier to say, screw it, I'm just going to stay home.
Yep.
um, and some days we do. And I tell people all the time, check in with your nervous system
Mm-hmm.
before you make a decision. And what we'll do in our house is it takes me and my husband to go out with my son most days if we're going to go someplace public. And it's usually like we'll check in with each other. Hey, what do you think about asking if he wants to go to the grocery store with us today? No, I'm not up for that. Okay, no problem. And then we go to, plan B. So we can't just get up in the morning and fly by the seat of our pants like a lot of people do.
Yeah.
If
Yep.
that makes sense.
Yes.
And then so we tend to isolate, but we also sometimes have to isolate because we're exhausted from being on high alert all the time. So
Yes.
what you said about the system, I guess what we call the somatic system, right? And you said something a minute ago about freezing. So
Mm-hmm.
for those that don't live and breathe trauma work, tell us what it looks like when you have a somatic response to
Yeah.
trauma.
Yeah. It can look in multiple different ways, and I will speak to my own experience and then come back. Freezing specifically is our parasympathetic nervous system just starting to feel like we can't, if we just stay still. It's the response we see in animals when they're in threat, and it's their last sort of ditch effort to protect themselves, and they completely stop and they freeze. We'll see this. You may experience this where you just can't function. You can't get out of bed. Sometimes this looks more like functional freeze as well, where you do get out of bed, especially as a special needs parent, because you don't have a choice not to. But you find that you're disconnected and at times even disassociated from your body or what you're doing as a way of self-protection.
Mm-hmm.
One of the most significant ways I experienced that somatic response in divorce was in fight, where I was so big and trying to control everything and wanted everything to go my way because it was the only way that I felt like I could feel safe, which, by the way, is the worst possible way to move through a high conflict divorce because nothing is fast. You don't get responses quickly, and no one likes a fighting female, in all honesty. um,
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah, and that is our sympathetic nervous system being totally dysregulated and trying to self-protect. Um, and it doesn't matter which way our bodies move, it needs compassion. Like we need to be able to understand, like, oh, this is what's happening for me right now, which takes awareness
Mm-hmm.
and also some self-compassion, understanding like this is my body trying to take care of myself. Like it's it can be it can have harmful outcomes, but the intent is good, right? Like the intent, the nervous system dysregulation is good because it's actually trying to protect us. And if we can see like this is my experience right now, I'm totally out of control. Well, what's happening that I'm so scared? And having some compassion for that feels really important through this process. Did I answer your question?
100%. Yes, yes, absolutely. And I think it can be so complicated. The thing I try to always let people know when they're going in either a fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response
Yes.
is to remember that it's not voluntary. Like
Yeah.
these things, you can dissociate and go, oh my gosh, wait, where did I just go? And not even realize it till after the fact.
Yeah.
So it's it's hard. And I know as a special needs parent, I've dealt with quite a bit of that too. And that's one of my signs that, oh, I need to take a break, or I need to take a day off, or I need a nap, or whatever it is, which, as you know, those things are hard to come by, but
They are.
it's all
And
part of taking care of ourselves.
yeah, it's your body telling you something like, okay, it's time. And I want to just, I know our time here, but I want to just speak a little bit more about Fawn. I mean, is there a nervous system response you see most often in your clients that are experiencing this type of trauma?
What a great question. I hadn't really thought about that before. Um, I see a lot of fawning. And fawning, I guess, can you tell us what you define as fawning?
Yeah, well, fawning tends to be more of this people pleasing response. So I'm going to align with in order to keep myself safe, right? So
Yeah.
this in high conflict antagonistic relationships, it might look like walking on eggshells to prevent the explosion from a high conflict personality. And so if I just align with and I try and please my partner and take care, and this doesn't have to be partner, this could be your parent, this could be your mother. If I try and please and make sure that they feel taken care of, then it keeps me safe. So that's what fawning is sort of lining up with another person's belief system in order to self-protect.
Yeah, I love the way you explained that. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's one that we forget about sometimes. And I would say that that's the one that I see, pardon me, probably the most often.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And in believe it or not, in a high conflict divorce, I would say that fight and fawn are probably they're probably equally as detrimental in this process.
Mm,
One,
yeah.
fight, of course, is sort of self-explanatory. Fawn, because especially with women I've seen go through this type of divorce will give and give and give to the extent where it is harming them, their future, their ability to take care of themselves. So both
Yes.
are actually really detrimental in a high conflict divorce.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. I see a lot of people pleasing in these situations. So it's hard, and I love that you've explained it as a trauma response so that we understand it's not just a person making a mistake or their personality. I'm definitely a recovering people pleaser. And when I realized that it was actually a trauma response,
Yeah.
um, I didn't want to believe it at first, right? But once you realize, oh, wait, I'm trying to make another person more comfortable than myself
Yeah.
by putting their needs first, and it may even be someone that's not even important to us.
Yep.
Um, I mean, I've caught myself trying to please, family members, trying to please doctors, trying to
Mm.
be like, oh, I'll try harder for my child's therapist because I wasn't, doing enough at home or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, no more.
Yeah. I love that you were able to connect that too, because I've seen that and in
Mhm.
myself for sure as a mom. And at times I've
Mhm.
even done that with my daughter because it's just it's easier, right? Versus like, no, we're actually going to do the thing that we're supposed to be doing. So it's easy to move
Right.
to that threat response. And yeah, yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Well, Rachel, I do want to be mindful of your time. If people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
They can just email Rachel at resilience2rise.com. My website is resilience to rise. I'm out of Bozeman, Montana, and that's a great way to connect. Even if you just want to learn more about this type of process, I love talking about what we've been talking about today. So thank you.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for being here. And I'll link to your Instagram page as well because it's very informative and I really enjoy reading it. So thank you for the work you do and thanks for coming on today.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me, Janine. I appreciate you.
The information in this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional.